This is a People First Radio podcast.
As our phones seemingly take up more and more of our attention, some apps promise to help us focus on the tasks we want to achieve. A group out of UBC says distraction blockers are often aimed at neurodivergent people, but in some cases, they could be inadvertently reinforcing a neurotypical worldview. Kevin Chow and Marvel Hariadi are part of a team who took a look at how neurodivergent people actually use distraction blockers. They're calling for more inclusive digital tools that recognize focus isn't a faucet.
I'm Kevin. I'm a postdoc at New York University at the Department of Technology Management and Innovation. I just recently completed my PhD at UBC, where my research broadly explored how to design tools to support people in being more productive, but also healthier and happier about their work. So that's the connection to this work with kind of focus apps helping, but looking at focus apps in a much more holistic kind of sense.
Hi, I'm Marvel. I just finished my undergraduate degree at UBC in computer science and business, which I know is a little bit out there. But my work, even before this research, focused on neurodivergency advocacy and inclusion. And so when I co-authored this paper with Kevin, that was what the focus that I really wanted to bring into the world with our human-computer interaction research here.
And so we're going to be talking about focus apps and neurodivergence today. Maybe to start with, Kevin, could you give me a sense of what are these apps, what are they intended to do, and how do they work?
Yeah, absolutely. So focus apps broadly are just tools that are, as their name kind of implies, they're designed to help you focus and be productive. And they've really skyrocketed in popularity, especially as things like social media becomes more popular, distractions all over on the internet. They're just trying to vie for your attention. And so people are trying to find these ways to reclaim some of their attention, reclaim some of their focus so that they can get things done. We specifically looked at distraction blockers, which are a specific type of focus app, and they work by blocking distractions. So they might block an app on your phone, like let's say Instagram, for a certain amount of time, or they might block a certain website that might be distracting if you're on your computer. So they're all throughout, different devices, and some of them are built into your web browser as well to directly block things like Facebook, YouTube, or whatnot. And the idea is that the idea is that by blocking these distractions, they can help you focus. But we might debunk that myth a little bit later in our conversation.
So that's one piece of the puzzle. We're also going to be talking about neurodivergence today. Marvel, you mentioned some of your work more generally is about neurodivergency advocacy. For the purposes of our conversation today, how would you define that term, neurodivergence?
Neurodivergence essentially means anything that is divergent, so going away from the quote-unquote norm of what our worldly society expects us to behave and cognitively think. And neurodivergency as a term also is very contentious because it depends on where you are, per country. Neurodivergency is not always the same as disability. Oftentimes it is. So, for example, in Canada, ADHD is both a disability and a neurodivergency, just to name an example. And it covers a really wide range of umbrella of lots and lots and lots of conditions, from autism, ADHD, anxiety, BPD, OCD. Well, our focus here for our research was specifically on the trifecta of anxiety, ADHD, and autism, because these three conditions have a lot of symptom overlap, especially in terms of productivity, but also have a lot of co-occurrence. So about, I think, 4 in 10 of autistic people who are diagnosed with autism also tend to also be diagnosed with anxiety. Same with ADHD. There's just a lot of overlap between these three conditions.
So what were the questions that you set out to answer about these focus apps and neurodivergent people?
Not me. I might call it Kevin here also. We sought to figure out how specifically neurodivergent post-secondary students within the education space, because this is such a big demographic for these type of apps, and how they really use these apps beyond the traditional expectation of you get the timer and then you block for a certain amount of time and then you work. Because what we often found, like even as a hypothesis, you could say in the beginning of this research, is that a lot of the times that's it that sort of traditional structure seldom worked for this population, especially that trifecta of ADHD, autism, anxiety. And so you're wondering, like, but at the same time, there's such a big demographic for it. So how are they really using it then? Is it different? Is it perhaps exaggerated, or are they really um, going against the use case to find a way that really works for them? Is it even in the realm of productivity that it really helps them?
So, Kevin, what did you end up finding about how neurodivergent people interact with these focus apps?
Yeah. Well, I'll add on a little bit to Marvel's point earlier, which was an excellent answer. But one of the things that actually motivated some of our research questions, and then I'll touch on what we found, was just the fact that when you hop on the App Store and you just search up distraction blocker or focus apps, you see a ton of these apps that are marketed towards people who have ADHD or who are neurodivergent in a sense. But we noticed that there wasn't a lot of literature that actually looked at this more specifically, and so we wondered, what we didn't see anyone actually talking to neurodivergent students about how they actually use these apps. And so that was kind of our intention with our research here. And what we found was really interesting. I think one of the key, one of the two of the key findings I think that we found was one that people use these apps to help them do more than just manage their focus. And so for folks who are neurodivergent, part of what they need to learn to do is to kind of regulate their sensory environment, regulate their emotions. And that was what some folks who use these distraction blockers, they kind of co-opted them so that they were tools that also helped them regulate their emotions by blocking kind of sensory input from these distracting apps and websites and things like that. The other thing that we found was, which I think kind of speaks to the heart of the article and how we found that focus apps kind of are actually failing neurodivergent minds to a degree, is that these apps can actually cause them to feel a little bit of self-stigma. And so, these apps seem to be built in a way that's very rigid and that assumes that focus is kind of there's only one right path to focus, when in reality there are many different ways to focus. And I think we know that from experience, our own experience, but also just through research as well. And so these apps are built to assuming that focus is sort of like this faucet that you can just turn on and off. As soon as I trigger my distraction blocker to block distractions, I'm instantly in the state to focus. But what we found from talking to neurodivergent folks is that isn't necessarily true. A lot of them have developed a lot of rituals and techniques and methods in I guess synergy with their distraction blocker to lead to a state of focus.
Well, I'm interested in this idea of we're being distracted by things on our devices. And so the solution is that we're going to have this like extra app on our devices that is going to help us through that. Could you talk to me about maybe just that as the framing? Like, what do you think is the important context around this idea of using the device to help you solve some problem that the device is hypothetically causing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this speaks to kind of something that we found in our findings as well, which is that some of our participants viewed these apps like this additional app that you're going to install on your phone or whatever that would help you manage your apps. Some of our participants viewed them as a crutch, something that, will I have to depend on this all my life? Will I have to have this app all my life? Whereas others viewed it more as a scaffold. Hey, this is a temporary thing that I might turn on at some points of my life, maybe when exam seasons are coming up, when something stressful is coming up, that I might just need a little bit more support. Or maybe right now I'm at a state where I need a little bit more support. And I think it really comes down to this idea of viewing our ability to focus as this sort of muscle. And I think for neurodivergent folks, this idea can be a little bit challenging because I think they've often been told by society or just based on the challenges that they face in day-to-day life that they're at this kind of starting, they might have more challenges with their focus, meaning that their starting point in terms of like their focus muscle might be different from someone else. But the idea is that it can be trained and developed, and in viewing these apps as more of this sort of scaffold that can help you get there or help you when you need it at certain times, that can lead to, I think, a healthier outlook on these apps overall and less of this sort of crutch-like framing of, do I need to have this app installed all my life?
So, what are the maybe design pieces that your research has said could be changed or tweaked to make these maybe more useful for, I don't know if it's an oxymoron or a contradiction in terms to say like the average neurodivergent person?
Well, definitely the term average neurodivergent person is a definitely like hard thing to kind of get together because everyone is so different. Even with people who have the same conditions of autism or anxiety or a combination, whatever, people are so different. I would say like if I had to boil it down, it's the idea of the right to self-determine, the right to set up things, set up your apps, your environment, whatever it is, the way that works, especially for you, which does require a bit of trial and error. I do want to talk about one of my favorite findings from the study, which is this concept of digital stimming. So that a lot of our neurodivergent participants, they'd often used their distraction blocker sit down, they block for, whatever amount of time, but then oftentimes they would unblock it intentionally to let themselves scroll for a bit, let themselves sort of stimulate themselves with, whatever media on their device, or if they're playing a game or, whatever it is. And so in this way, they kind of intentionally turn off their blocker in order to give themselves space to stimulate. And I was actually looking at some research by Alora Young, who is also a neurodivergency PhD researcher in the States, talking about how this concept of seeking stimulation is a form of oftentimes seeking dopamine. And so and this is also consistent with what participants said in our interviews, that they kind of need a little bit of a dopamine hit, um, just even to sort of get them remotivated back into wanting to do their work. Sometimes they would, maybe self-stimulate in the beginning, right before they even started to sit down and do their work. They kind of had a little moment to calm down by giving themselves a little moment to scroll, and then they set their blocker, or they do it between study breaks or whatever it is. And so I think a design pattern that we were looking at that I think we recommend if for people who do want to have this self simulation is this idea of we sort of give a certain amount of content in case, let's say it's Instagram Reels or TikToks, a set amount of time that fits perfectly into 5 minutes. And then this content could be curated to be really self-soothing, be calming. So a very specific set, nothing too addicting in whatever way that means for the user, and not too upsetting. So for example, maybe we might want to avoid like really upsetting news, like in this era of climate change, for example, just an example. And then so after exactly 5 minutes is up and all the content fits neatly within that 5 minutes, then the blocker automatically can turn back on and then we're back to business. And the idea behind this is that you kind of give a little bit moment to self-stim, but not too much that you get carried away into a rabbit hole and then you end up scrolling for 2 hours, which might have been me last night, but don't worry about that.
Well, there's also the dimension of this where we've been hearing increasingly in the last number of years about the design of some of the platforms you can access on your phone being changed to make it so that it's harder to stop using, being designed to keep you using it. Things like the endless scroll. We've all heard, no doubt, about the algorithm. Even just the framing of focus or like focus apps, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but there can be this framing that accompanies them of like, I am really struggling to focus. This is like a me issue in this environment of, well, all of these things are being designed to keep your focus and to keep you away from whatever it is that you maybe feel like you ought to be doing.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that more. Yeah, because we have some really interesting research going on right now at UBC with Professor Dong Wookian. Shout out Dong Wook, on like dark patterns. We were just at a conference in April in Barcelona, and there's some really interesting research in Maastricht University about these like addictive dark patterns and their compliance with EU law. EU apparently has some really great like legislation against dark patterns. And so this is just for the general populace. So there's not even research yet, as far as I know, that is also on neurodivergency. And I would love to look into that more. If any researchers are out there and want to talk more about this and research this, like hit me up. I would love to see more of this in the world.
When you say dark patterns, what do you mean there?
So dark patterns are these design patterns in tech that are, as they imply, they're dark. So then they intentionally get people to do unhealthy things, quote unquote. And so the most popular one that I would say, in my opinion, is the most pressing right now is this whole thing about the infinite scroll. I don't know if you've ever seen, but the designer who made the infinite scroll has made a public statement that he regrets making it, right? Because it's a dark pattern that is intentionally made to keep you addicted on your device.
This is People First Radio. My guests are Kevin Chow and Marvel Hariadi. They worked on a study out of UBC looking at how neurodivergent people use distraction blockers. So in the face of the infinite scroll, we maybe turn to the focus apps. And I know that these focus apps are sometimes like intentionally marketed at people who are neurodivergent. What do you feel, I don't know, is maybe like is there maybe an inherent message about neurodivergence that's kind of conveyed through the design of these apps, even though there's something that like we might turn to in the face of things like the infinite scroll?
Yeah, like I would say that this is a topic also in our research that we spoke in our paper is that there's kind of this implied lack, when you're neurodivergent, that you lack something and that you are therefore like less capable than other neurotypical people. And that's the antithesis of neurodivergent, right? Neurotypical. That's I would say most people in the world. And so what we also discussed explicitly in the paper, like if anyone here wants to go out and read it, is that this idea that we can redesign these apps or redesign our whole systems, in the world, even I would go as far to say, to sort of both uphold the strengths that a lot of neurodivergent people have, with their conditions and not just treat them as less than. So for example, a lot of people with this trifecta of conditions often have more creative thinking and nonlinear workflows. So they're really good with multitasking and types of work that might require very multifaceted, things like going on at the same time, like juggling multiple hands at the same time, shall we say. And these sort of the way that our world works, the way our tech works, and the way our productivity culture works is that we are forced to sort of focus on being good at one or a few things at a time, and just really like be productive for linear and rigid amounts of time throughout the day. And then a lot of times when neurodivergent people cannot hold themselves to that standard, they feel like, is there something wrong with me? Like what's oh my God, am I just lazy? And so I want every neurodivergent people out there, who anyone who's listening to this, to know there's nothing wrong with you. The way your brain works is just different from the standard of the world, and that's perfectly okay. It's more of a matter of finding out how do we fit that brain into the rest of the world. Yeah. But I've been talking for too long. I'm going to pass it to Kevin now.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit. But really, really well put, Marvel. I really want to emphasize that I think one of the main things that of this research is that if a focus app isn't working, it doesn't mean you are the problem. Joe, you mentioned how, there's what the term is called kind of the attention economy, right? The idea is that companies are vying for your attention now because that's where they can show you kind of more ads or kind of build on your engagement, user engagement, things like that. And those are the metrics that they're interested in. And that's the world that we're in now, right? Attention is a resource, and they want that resource from you. And so if you're really fighting an uphill battle, and I think neurodivergent folks with their specific brain wiring and specific challenges that they might have are facing especially even more uphill of a battle. But if these apps aren't working for you, our research shows that it's not you that's the problem. It's these apps that are designed assuming that the right way to focus is just this way where you follow this sort of Pomodoro timer-like technique. I'm sure folks may or may not have heard of it before, but it's this idea that you try to set aside 25 minutes or some amount of time to focus, put away your phone, everything, assuming that you can just focus in those 25-minute blocks, take a break, then another 25 minutes. And that's a very structured way of working. And it doesn't really draw on the strengths of neurodivergent individuals, which is something that I think we want to design for as well. Design with a strengths-based framing, and not from a deficit-based framing, not from this idea that, hey, how do we cover up your weaknesses or deficits, but rather how do we empower your strengths? And so Marvel touched on it a little bit, but folks who have ADHD experience this phenomenon called hyperfocus, where they can really just sit down and work for hours on end. Like if you've ever had, I think all of us have had this experience of kind of going on this rabbit hole and just really, hours fly by. And that can actually be a really productive time for people who have ADHD. But these apps assume that you need to work in these 25-minute blocks. And so you might work in 25 minutes and then the time's up. And then suddenly for someone who has ADHD, they're out of their flow before they even got into it. And so the idea is that, yeah, I think the takeaway for us really is that if Focus app isn't working, it doesn't mean you are the problem. We need to design apps that support all sorts of diverse ways of working, not just assume that there's one right way.
From doing this research, do you feel like still there is a significant role for focus apps to play in helping people focus? Like, do you feel like that is a good starting point to address some of the issues that people might be having or tech might be causing for people?
Yeah, I think I view it as that these apps, they absolutely can help. They've helped me in the past. Sometimes I still use them as well. The point isn't that they're all bad. It's that they're just currently often designed for one way of focusing. And they kind of fail to consider the needs, unique strengths of neurodivergent individuals. And so I think my view is that one, we need to kind of approach the design of these focus apps with a more inclusive lens. And I think our research begins to do that. I think there are people who are also starting to look in this direction. And two, I think we need to treat these apps, we need to use these apps in a way where we don't assume that if it's not working, it's us that's the problem. I think we need to have this sort of openness to experimenting with what might help with our focus or not. A lot of these apps might be designed, like this one app might work for you because the way that you focus is really aligned with how this app works. Or perhaps in just the specific season or context of your life, that app works. But maybe on a regular basis, it doesn't work, and it's okay to not use it. I think a lot of people feel a lot of shame, which is something that I think we found too from talking to the neurodivergent students in our study, when these apps don't work, or when even while I'm using these apps, I still can't focus, and a lot of that has the blame has been assigned to themselves. When I really think I really would encourage folks to take this sort of open kind of experimental approach to using these apps, to figuring out how and what works best for your focus.
If there are people out there who have never tried using any kind of focus app, or maybe weren't even really aware of them being out there, I'm wondering, for both of you, either from your own personal experience or from doing this research, if there are people who find that they're having issues, maybe being distracted, or they like a day passes and they go, wow, I spend 3.5 hours doing unproductive things on my phone and I would like to change that. Are there any recommendations either of you would have for things people in that situation might want to check out?
Yeah, so I can speak directly to what our participants have used in our that we studied, and also some I've discovered since the research has been published. So a forest was a really popular one. So forest is the one with you plant little trees every time you set a timer, and so there's an aspect here of gamification where it makes it fun to see your little forest grow because every time you successfully complete a focus like block for like I don't know an hour, 30 minutes, whatever you want to set it, you contribute to your little garden. Paid feature, I believe you can also contribute to like planting a tree. So if you're interested in that like go green aspect, which I think everybody should be interested in, that's also great. If you're an Android user, I'm a proud Android user. I don't care what anybody says. I use App Lock. And if you're an Apple user, there's already Apple Screen Time natively attached to your phone, which I know a lot of our participants used as well. One thing is that for me, I also have an iPad, is that I tend to just like press add 10 minutes, and that happens over and over again. And then in the end, I'm there sitting for 3 hours on YouTube shorts and feeling very bad about myself. So I would also recommend stuff like Cold Turkey. That is an actual name of an app, Cold Turkey.
I think Marvel gave a lot of really good specific suggestions. I was just thinking about how to answer this question because I think, like my answer to the previous question, I've just experimented with so many things over the years, and some things have worked, some things have stuck. Um, Maybe I'll answer this from sort of a different angle, which is some kind of practices that I do. Maybe not app specific. I am an iOS user, so we have breadth of perspective here. And I do use Apple Screen Time from now and then to kind of block certain apps and kind of when something's coming up and let's say it's something that I know that I um, hate doing, and I will probably procrastinate on it. I will probably be distracted or want to distract myself from it. Then I might turn on a blocker specifically for that time, and kind of use it for that period of time. The other thing that I like to do is, and I think this is growing in popularity now, is to just try to actually make using your phone a little bit less rewarding or interesting by making the whole screen grayscale. You can do this on your iPhone as well. It's kind of built into it's part of the accessibility settings, and you can make your whole screen grayscale. It makes everything a little bit less interesting or rewarding. It's less interesting to use your phone. And so for certain periods of time when everything's in grayscale, I'm just like, you know what? Let's go do something else instead, rather than look at this hard to navigate, ugly looking screen. And so that's something that I found has consistently worked for me. And there's ways to set it up so you can easily plug that on and off.
Marvel, Kevin, is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation on this today?
If I could leave then all the neurodivergent people here, like, or how shall I say, like, if you suspect you're neurodivergent, please, if it's within your capability and budget, seek a diagnosis. It makes life so much easier to know exactly what you're working with. And secondly, there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain is working differently and working in a magical way all on its own. I don't mean that in just like the kindergarten like teacher way. I also mean that in the sense that like there's so much magic to your brain as a neurodivergent person that most likely you have not tapped into just yet, and you just don't realize how absolutely amazing you are. Don't let anything, especially the productivity culture of this world, tell you otherwise.
And I think for me, maybe what I'll leave folks with is that we've been talking a lot about neurodivergent folks, but I really do think there's this idea we're trying to create more inclusive design right here, right? We're trying to design these tools in a way that is more inclusive of all people, including neurodivergent people. And even though we've been talking about neurodivergent folks today, I really do think that more inclusive designs in focus apps will help all people. There's this idea in inclusive design called the curb cut effect. And so if you've ever seen a curb and you've seen it kind of slope into the road now, that was originally designed to be inclusive for people who are wheelchair users, for accessibility purposes. But we now, from experience, know that benefits everyone. People who have baby strollers, people who are just carrying their luggages, and they're on the go or on travel, or people who are delivering goods to different places. And I really do think that even though this conversation has been about neurodivergent people, there's a huge spectrum in how we all focus, whether we feel like we're neurotypical or neurodivergent. In fact, it's probably more of a spectrum than the way we've been talking about it. We were using these binary terms just for an ease of conversation, just for the ease of conversation, but there really is more of a spectrum, research is showing. And I believe that by designing these tools to be more flexible, to be less rigid, to support diverse ways of working, it'll help us all.
Kevin, Marvel, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me on this.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Kevin Chow and Marvel Hariadi speaking with me about a UBC study looking at how neurodivergent people use distraction blockers.
People First Radio, People First Media, and People First Stories are community media projects of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society and are produced in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society or its broadcast, podcast, and social media partners.